I feel like I used to make more videos that were actual advice, and now I just accept the fact that I'm not very qualified to give advice, and this is kind of just entertainment that's like pseudo-intellectual or something. So, with that out of the way, I heard a really interesting idea from one of my mentors about how the English curriculum is really flawed. And his argument was basically we spend a ton of time on units like focusing on grammar and when to use apostrophes and like when to use commas and what's a clause and a predicate and all this stuff, and like these kind of arcane grammatical rules. I mean, they're not super arcane, I guess they're pretty important, but a bunch of like syntax rules that kind of bog you down, and he said those should be pushed to something more advanced. For instance, like this should be the calculus equivalent of English. Like you only learn those rules like kind of far into learning English. And what you should really be front loaded with, focused on the most, is vocabulary building, because what words we have access to really shape the way we think about things. And they're like the demarcations of what things we recognize as things. And there's like, there's many words that kind of fallen out of use and have been kind of simplified and streamlined down. And he gave me a great example. He had a book of synonyms, like a dictionary of synonyms, which is basically like it gives you a word and then it tells you all the synonyms and why they differ slightly. So like you don't really say like wrathful or irate anymore when you mean angry, because it just sounds kind of pretentious. But he was showing me this book and it was mind-blowing. I'll see if I can find a screenshot. It basically says like there are slight semantic differences in all of those words, and using different words, like it's very like precise little golf putter motions to get exactly to the semantic meaning you want. But it doesn't really work unless everyone also knows all those words. Otherwise, people just think you're kind of pretentious. Like you'll get your meaning across more or less in broad strokes if you're like, that guy was irate. But there's like a specific difference to irate that someone who hasn't memorized the dictionary of synonyms wouldn't know. But if in school, in English class, we just like worked on learning tons and tons of words, we would it would shape the way we think. I think that's really cool, and you definitely do, like in English class you read books, and that's kind of helpful, I guess. I remember in my middle school English class, which actually I feel like was kind of better than my high school English classes, weirdly enough. Sometimes there's just a 10x teacher, you know. We've all had one of those that's just like this is like a college level class in high school. Why are you a high school teacher? And we had an assignment where we'd have to, like, every week we'd have to find 5 new vocab words by reading. And I remember reading back then, like, H.P. Lovecraft, Call of Cthulhu, which just has so many vocab words, it's unreal. It's like more words that you don't know per sentence than words that you do know. And that was cool, but I think it would be better to make it, like, kind of a, like, every week you should write, and someone gave me a suggestion for this in one of my newer videos about trying to get better at reading. Every week you should try to write like a paragraph with as many new words as possible, and like really try to use them for their specific meanings. Don't use them as drop-in synonyms, if that makes sense. But I don't know. I thought that was a really interesting observation, and I guess just to make this video like slightly more than 4 minutes and 12 seconds, I'm going to tack on another observation he said, which was the Scantron has really transformed the way we look at history, which is really interesting, and I'll explain why. It's because Scantron kind of forces questions into a multiple choice format, and that works pretty well for science and math and things where you've got kind of a right or wrong answer. But in history, you can have your responses to questions. What you should be learning in history is much more like nuanced reasoning, and it basically, like, having a Scantron takes a why question and makes it into like a which or a what question, if that makes sense. And then we get a bunch of questions in history like, what was the date of this war, or when did this guy die, or when was this guy president? I don't know. I didn't have a ton of those thinking back to like AP US history, but definitely there are parts of the US where Scantron I think is bigger for history tests. Maybe my high school was different, but that is pretty interesting that like the medium of the test absolutely warped the field of history. And if you're just memorizing like dates, that's like such a goddamn useless thing to know about history. That's just like a piece of trivia you'll forget and you could never apply to anything. But if you think about like why things went down, that's a much better way to look at history. Yeah, I probably butchered that explanation of the Scantron warping the education system. Sorry for ripping off your ideas, my mentor. But I don't know. I think they should be out in front of lots of people because they really warped has a kind of negative connotation. They really shaped how I see some things. I think that's pretty cool.